Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 144 of Kouryer podcast. Our today's guest is Mr. Max Dorey. He's a sculptor and model maker of sci-fi ships, dioramas, and sculptures from Bristol United Kingdom. Now, before I get into the first question, I need to also mention something that in the captions below, you can see, like in the for contact section, there's his Instagram, there's his link to his websites, and also a link to his shop, which he is put some of his dioramas and models for sale. So you can, if you're interested, you can check him out as well. I needed to, just give that shout out in the beginning of the episode so no one misses it out. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump into the first question. Give us a little introduction on how we got into the world of visual arts and design and just all of this madness.
I've spent the last 10 years working as a set designer for theatre, and that was my sort of professional introduction. I think when I was a teenager, I had that sort of moment where I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but I knew I was interested in art, and I've always drawn. I've always been involved in making things. I've always tried to do creative things. So by the time I got to that point, when you're sort of 15, 16 and having to start making choices about what you're going to do with your life, think about university and things like that, I knew that it was either related to art or theatre, which was sort of the two big things I was interested in. And so when I was at school, I was doing very well with those. They're basically the only subjects that I did really that well at. And so when I applied to university, I considered doing art, but I figured that doing art would always be something that I do in my own time, creatively. Whereas with theatre, I thought it was something I could really practice at and benefit from further education. So I went to university. I went to Leeds University to study English literature and theatre studies, which was a very sort of holistic course about. It wasn't theatre practice per se. It was a variety of modules where there's the history of theatre and its different forms of theatre and making theatre and all those sorts of things. And whilst I was there, I started getting very interested in. I made a lot of theatre. I performed, and I started designing sets. And I think that was when I started getting involved in a lot of puppetry and other physical making things, basically. And it started to dawn on me that there was a way that I could combine the two. So doing something involving theatre and art as well, but combined together. And so when I came towards the end of my time there, I applied for several design courses, and I took a place at Bristol Old Vic here in Bristol, which is a well-known theatre school in the UK and has really wonderful courses for acting, but also a lot of very good technical courses. And the theatre design course there is very hands-on. So it just meant that I was doing something artistic, but I think because I'd always been a bit nervous about the idea of just going out there and calling myself an artist, it meant I had a practical reason to do creative and artistic things. And that's really what kept me through for the last nearly 10 years or so since I graduated from there. And then since there, it's sort of taken its own interesting path and it's sort of weaved its way into other things. One of the things about theatre design is we express a design through a model, through a physical 3D model made out of card and paper and other variety of materials. And so model making was central to what I was doing. And so that was something which I then continued as a passion in my own time. So that sort of led me to doing the sort of Dreamy Ox project, which was supposed to be a side project and has now, in the last couple of years, become more of my main focus, aside from theatre.
All right. And well, I mean, we kind of talked briefly about it before we started recording about how we got into model making and, making dioramas and sculpting and all that stuff. But I was wondering, your main branch of design, as I said in the introduction right now, it based even on the stuff we can see on your website and your Instagram is basically making sculptures, dioramas, and, models and stuff like that. So we know that's your main thing that you're going with. So tell us, how did you, because as you said prior to this, you were a set designer at theater. Then, Corona hit the world and, everything shut down. But could you give us a full story of how we got into the world of dioramas and model making and all that stuff? And
Sure.
and just one thing, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just one thing to also add. Could you also please tell why you didn't go to digital route for 3D modeling?
Huh. Um, that's funny because I do need to. I'm aware that I need to do more digital modeling, and frankly, that's something that now, when I trained in theatre design, I trained to use AutoCAD 2D, but when I started, I still got trained to draw a theatre ground plan on paper with with a rotring pen and all that, and then we started using AutoCAD, and now no one would. Most people, certainly from my generation of designers and anyone coming below, they don't go near a piece of paper; they just do it digitally. And using 3D resources, I'm learning more and more of those. I guess. I mean, I was never. I felt particularly computer savvy when I was younger. My brother's very computer savvy, and he sort of took over all of that stuff. And I just enjoyed doing things with my hands and being practical. And I think I had this kind of incorrect idea that they were sort of you were either quite technical or you were either quite practical with your hands, that sort of thing. And what's interesting now is more and more of those tools are becoming accessible to everyone. So, but going down the digital route, I don't know. I think I remember when I was first training in Leeds, there was a program where you could design sets in. It was a program called WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, and you can create the space, and you can look through it, and you can do all that sort of thing. And those design tools have become more and more sophisticated, and people generally are doing amazing things with those. I think I'd felt at the time that. I mean, certainly then, it's got much better now because you can artificially light them really brilliantly and you can do all these things. But it didn't, for me, it didn't have the practicality of being able to literally jump in and just rip up a piece of paper and stick it in the model and say, do I want it to be this big? Maybe. What if we make it this big? And I could rough it all out in the model very easily. But also, those digital tools just didn't. I don't know, there was just something about the physicality of it being there in front of you. Just there's something about miniatures, because when you see a piece of digital design on a screen, it's sort of it's not really in a miniature scale. It's in a 1-to-1 scale because you choose how big or how small you want it to be. The camera's like your eye. Whereas with a miniature in the real world, it's a miniature. It has a fixed scale, and it's all these things I'm saying to some degree sound like negative things, but for me that was always kind of interesting. It just meant that you were sort of just focusing on the world of the play and telling the story. But yeah, honestly, the notion of it being, oh, I should do this but in a digital route, just didn't really seem to be. It never really occurred to me that was something I should do or anything. It was sort of, I was just sort of following the way that things went with theatre design. And now obviously I'm doing the sculptures I'm making and the way I'm working with my pieces, it would be impossible to do the whole thing digitally because it all starts with a physical object. I don't know what I'm going to make until I find the thing that inspires the piece I'm going to make. So I do use some digital elements. I laser cut pieces occasionally. If I think I need a little thing, I can do that and have a laser cutter here in the studio that I can use. So those sort of tools are amazing. And I think probably the next one that I'm going to try and crack is 3D printing, because I think if I miss the boat on that, then that's going to be a standard thing. Well, it already is a standard thing for so many things. So 3D printing is the next thing. But in terms of designing completely in digital format, I don't know. I think it's a really, really wonderful format. It's something that I would have to probably embrace wholeheartedly to a degree that I don't think I'd be able to do it justice, really. I mean, I follow really incredible digital artists on Instagram, people who do really fantastic stuff, and I look at what they do and go, yeah, I don't think I can do that as well as you can. So, yeah, I just like noodling away with my bits and pieces here. What can I say?
All right. And well, I mean, speaking of 3D modeling and stuff like that, I need to quickly mention something because I think it's also going to be interesting for you as well. On episode 110, I think I uploaded it on late October, like the last October. I interviewed an artist called Gavin Manners. He's a concept artist at Hadamhog, but he's actually like you, a serious. He's one of his serious hobbies is also modeling and 3D printing, like doing mechs and all this Warhammer 4K and robots and mechs, and not just Warhammer stuff, like just the whole hobby. Do you know how it is?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
especially he does a lot of mechs and stuff. And so I think you should also check his stuff out, like if you want to get into 3D printing and stuff like that. And even before the podcast, I asked you, is Newcastle and Bristol near? That's why I asked this, because he's from Newcastle.
Aha. Yeah. Oh, definitely. No, I'll definitely check it out. There's this thing now that the doors are open to, incredible artistic, incredible artistic practices, and I think that the direction of travel with all of these things, with technical things, is how can it be accessible for everyone? There's a company based here at Puppet Place called Rusty Squid, and one of the central ethics behind the company, David McGarren, who's a really incredible performer and maker, and they make machines and robots, but they're all intertwined with performance as well. And everything that we do and everything that I do is sort of, it stems from the idea of performance and storytelling. One of the things that he makes really clear is there's for years this idea that, oh, well, I don't use technical things, digital things, I don't use computers or what have you, or that somehow if it's done in a computer that it's less personal. It's like if I make a piece of sculpture by hand, like a clay sculpture, that's very, that comes from a human, and therefore it's very, very engaging in a sort of human level. But if it's made by a computer, it's somehow kind of cold and, it's not as engaging in the same way. And what David makes clear is a computer, a digital thing is just a tool, in the same way that a scalpel is a tool. It's a much more complex tool with many different facets to it, but the way you use it and the human uses it is the way that it creates these, amazing things. You tell it what to do and it can do all these things. So actually, if we're scared of, understanding how those things work and say, oh, well, that's just for, engineering purposes or whatever, whereas this is for art, quote unquote, then, artists are always the people who then pick up tools that are designed for one thing and say, I wonder what this can do that in a way that is not what it was originally intended for, but makes something new and interesting and, breaks open the mold a little bit. So yeah, I think that, for my work as well, digital tools are they're things which are just sort of, once you crack that code, it makes life a heck of a lot easier. You're sort of doing things in a way that you can cut out a whole number of steps that you might have had to do otherwise. But it does take a bit of practice.
Yeah, and well, here's the thing. Like the main reason I I was kind of interested in your work was because, of course, the main actual reason that I invite people on the podcast is because if I see someone who is like having, like, it shows that someone has some creative juice in their works and they're doing whether it be set design, whether it be like model making, whether it be like landscape painting, I don't care. I like to talk with them, just to see how their stories. But another main reason that I was super excited was the subject of your, the stuff you made, different, with this kind of sci-fi spaceships, this kind of kind of, I think, I don't know, there's a lot of subgenres to this, like there's cyberpunk, there's not cyberpunk, steampunk, there's post-punk, there's all that stuff. And there's another artist that's that their works, he's actually a digital artist, Ian McQueen. I don't know if you know him.
He's an inspiration.
Yeah, it was obvious, because the styles look so similar, and I personally love that style, and that's why I was kind of interested to ask you. But here's what I want to ask you because of this. What is the main subject of your artwork? I mean, regardless of do you have a whole world, a universe built inside your head while you make this new dioramas and sculptures, or you just go freestyle and see what happens?
Yes, it's a bit of both. But when I started making my pieces, I got inspired by certain things that I thought would look interesting visually. I mean, I was sort of always into sort of sci-fi stuff and sci-fi aesthetics from media and films and stuff that I was consuming. And so when I was making things, I started making these kind of huts on stilts, and I thought they were just really interesting. And I thought I could make a whole village of these. And I had this thing for a while that I would get this obsession with one thing and want to make loads and loads of it. So I started making these stilt huts, and then later on, when I was making the sort of sci-fi floating ships and things like that, people would say, do these exist in the same universe? And I go, well, I don't know. I sort of wanted to leave it open for interpretation. But then I started realizing that I had my own sort of ideas about how these things were, where they fitted within a world or a universe. And maybe I should start making that clear in my pieces. What I quite like, I mean, for me, all of this sort of stuff I do is actually a storytelling thing. It's, people are natural storytellers. When they look at things, and especially when they look at dioramas or miniatures, they want to tell themselves little stories about, who lives there and what does this thing do and what's it for. And people really like to sort of get under the skin of those things. So for me, the moment where I sort of cracked it and I embrace the idea of it all being part of an overarching storyline was I was trying to think. In miniatures, there's an idea of what's right or what's wrong. So, for example, in scale, do I build this at 1 to 12, 1 to 35, 1 to 25, 1 to 50? And if you take something that is a model making practice but is done less as less for making sculpture as pure art and more as a hobby, something like Model Railroad or or Warhammer or something like that, the scale has to be the same, because it doesn't make sense if you have your little characters who are sort of this big and then you say, and here's my character and it's twice the size or 3 times the size, or what have you. So I was thinking on those levels, how can my stuff all be part of the same universe if some of them are 1 to 50, some are 1 to 35, some are 1 to 1 to 25, whatever. I wanted to make things at different scales because things work to different models. And there was also this idea of accuracy, going, how perfect is it? How much is it exactly realistic, and that sort of thing. And I was thinking, why do people have miniatures and models in the first place? And the moment it cracked for me was when I thought, what if these are never supposed to be the real thing? What if these are actually always being presented as maquettes, as if they are illustrating a story like in a museum? So if you go to a museum and you see a model of a Roman town, or a beautiful model of like a warship or something like that, you look at it and says, hey, this is what the warship looked like, or this is what the Roman city looked like. You don't for a second think, oh, it's not realistic because that tree wouldn't be there, or that looks a little bit like that. You just go, oh, that's cool. And you just enjoy the story being told to you as part of that. And with that, it just liberated me from the idea of having to be accurate to a set of rules that would actually confine me. It meant I could open up and I could do anything, because if these were all maquettes in a museum, then you can say, well, this is what we think it looked like. But, we don't know, but this is probably what it looked like. And so the natural route for me for the storytelling was imagining that this is some museum far, far, far in the future, looking back on a period of time. And that's when the idea of the Museum of the Anthropocene came from, because like many people, I'm curious about this time. We're facing this idea of climate change and all of those sort of apocalyptic predictions and things, which suddenly don't seem quite as sci-fi and seem quite sort of terrifyingly real. And the problem is that when you're in a moment in time, you can't really see the wood for the trees. You need to have that sort of outside context. So I thought, if we look back on the Romans now, or the Egyptians, we look back with 2,000 years of hindsight and say, how could they have not realized that this was problematic or whatever? And I thought, what will they think in 4,000-5,000 years if you go into a museum and it's the Museum of the Anthropocene, it's about humans' effect on the planet? You would go into the museum and it would be saying, hey, the planet was great and everything was really good, and then everything got really, messed up, and it was humans who did it, and they'd say, didn't they realize what they're doing? Say, yes, they did, but they still did it anyway, and they were trying, but they didn't. And I don't know. I thought it would make an interesting idea of something that we've all seen a lot of sci-fi, post-apocalyptic stuff. It's sort of Mad Max worlds and all those sorts of things. And I just thought, what if you had something that was sort of a bit emotionless? It was just kind of saying, well, this was what life was like then, and then things got really bad, and then everyone was trying to scrape by, and people needed all the things they needed to sustain life, and then things improved. And I just thought, if you put it way in the future, you could have it sort of looking back, and you could start to tell stories within that. And that's the thing that's been most exciting for me, is whenever I'm making an object, I'll go, I don't know what this is. And then suddenly it starts to become something in my head. And I think, well, why would that exist in the first place? And then I get to start to tell stories. And then when I finally present my pieces on Instagram, or I put them on my website, I write a little museum sort of guide, as it were, of saying, this is what this piece represents. This is what it was. This is what it did. And because you can imagine they might not necessarily be totally accurate, I thought that could be quite fun. It's like, if you find something from the Roman era and say, we think this is what it was used for. You don't know for certain, but you can have a bit of fun there and speculate. So it sort of leaves the door open for audiences to look at it and imagine what they want it to be, as well as allowing me to sort of have a bit of fun and say, well, it could be this, might not be, but this is what we think it was, and this is how we think it looked.
All right, that's actually quite interesting. And actually, there's this kind of trend. There's actually a genre I recently found that it's kind of like near to one of my favorite niches that I really like in like fiction, and it's called solar punk. I don't know if you've heard of it yet or not.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: the specific genre that I want to make artwork from, and I really like. I don't know it's not there yet. I haven't seen it anywhere, but there's it's going to be a new thing, I think. Basically, what the thing I like is like a mix of solar punk and post-urbanism, something like that. It's even a genre in architecture. Basically, all right, let me explain. Imagine a post-apocalyptic messed up world that, everything is broken, everything is destroyed by war. But like a couple of 100,000 years later, life emerges out of it. Like, I think a good example I can tell is the end of Wall-E, where it's a dusty, messed up world, and then there's plants growing everywhere, and there's Then in my head there's balloons. There's kids playing around in the corpse of I don't know, not corpse. That's actually not a technical good word to use. Basically the hunk of metals of robots that was there. Those sort of vibes. A colorful post-apocalyptic world, basically.
Mm. It's funny because one of my pieces, actually, I've got here, I'm getting him ready for exhibition. I've got a little robot fella that I've been working on.
Nice.
And he's sort of, doing some gardening, and there's something about little robotic characters, because I was mainly doing the ships, and I was all about how did people travel and get around, and people being soul traders. And I thought it'd be fun to make some little robots. And I was running through the storyline going, oh, what if, post-apocalyptic, and then a lot of humanity has died, but the robots that were there to serve humanity have been left to their own devices. And then after a while they get bored, so they start planting gardens and going fishing and just, messing around. I went through this whole storyline, and I went, oh, it's Wall-E. It's just Wall-E. And I realized that the post-apocalyptic solar punk genre, Wall-E basically did it. That is it in kind of a nutshell, beautifully, But it's sort of I think what the point they kind of make, and that's very much the sort of idea of the approach to my pieces and to the Museum of the Anthropocene, is that it is possible for us to get out of this, and it is possible that the future actually will be very bright and there'll be very good things in future. But the question is, how close do we need to get to the current way of being and systems and life as we know it being stripped away? At which point do you say we're going to now move towards the better future? Is it where we are now and then we change course? Is it that we don't successfully change course and actually it is very unpleasant for the next 200-300 years, and then at which point people go, maybe it would be a good idea to start living more sustainably or what have you. I think that's why the idea of looking back with kind of hindsight is sort of interesting. I think that this notion of the Earth wants to run itself. It is balanced. Things want to grow. It's the way that we use the planet and resources is not natural for it. It's for this moment in time, and things will be and should be different in future. But we're still completely operating on a system that is based on, a way of thinking, a way of living that's been in existence since the Industrial Revolution, and that's understandable. I'm kind of the same. Like we say, let's get rid of, we kind of can't grasp the idea of saying, what if we didn't have, electricity and cars and all these sorts of things? We want the stuff that we have because it's useful and it keeps us warm and dry and feeds us and gets us from A to B. And it's troublesome to us to think that there are some things we can change to make more sustainable so they won't destroy the planet. And there are other things you'd say, maybe we just don't have that anymore. It's just something that we won't be able to have again in future. And so the idea of a world, a society in which I think that's that idea of sort of post-apocalyptic worlds, everything's sort of stripped away and people can't really imagine what it would be to live in that sort of thing. I think people like to play with that genre. But one of the things I became aware of as well was, we keep talking about this, it's a very Western world oriented thing. So much of the world lives in poverty and lives without those sorts of resources anyway. And we sort of, oh no, it's terrible this. And it's still, the richest 1% of the world that's causing the largest amount of climate change and emissions, all those sorts of things. So, it's a very tricky situation. But, I don't want to get to, I certainly don't have answers for these things. But I think artistically, I thought it would be interesting to play with the idea of a sort of ghost of Christmas future, a sort of idea of, well, this is interesting, but actually mix it with fact as well. So my hope, my ambition for a solo exhibition to this is to make it the museum, as if it's like an immersive storytelling experience, and you come in, and when you leave, you should kind of leave with a sense of going, this was of course a fictionalized account of a future yet to come, but actually there is real stuff in there that shows you, this is where things are progressing, and this is where things will get to at some point. And I think that could be a very interesting artistic thing to play with.
All right. And how does your design process usually go anytime you want to start working on a new project? Like, what is the structure of your pipeline of your work usually looks like?
I usually make most of my items from cast-off materials or what might otherwise be scrap materials, and I usually start with a central thing that's going to make the basis of a piece. So, for example, my studio here, I have at the moment, this is the body from an old mixer, a kind of I think it's like a sort of soup mixer type thing, and I have some little figures here, and when I looked at this and took it apart, I don't know about you, but I thought that looks uncannily like some sort of a futuristic speeder hover bike or something. So I spent a while putting characters in and thinking, where might they go? And so thinking, well, that might be a sort of little cockpit area, and then sort of putting some ideas together. I'll do a few sketches for things, just to play with some ideas, often just to see, I guess, which way up it might go. If I took, got something like this, which is a sort of large tin, and I think, well, it could go that way or it could go that way. And I sort of sketch out a few ideas and then start introducing objects that I have in the studio to it. And often I'll have things which I've had for a while that I think, oh, that'll work well with that. And I've sort of described it like doodling in 3D. I don't really have any particular plan where it's going. It sort of starts to evolve in front of you. And it's a bit like, it's sort of like doing a jigsaw when you don't have the picture on the box. When I pick up an item, if I go, right, I need a round thing here, I'll go through my drawers, and I've got drawers full of, this is just full of lots of round things, old bits of camera and lenses and all those sorts of things like that. And as soon as I find a thing which just fits it, it looks like it was meant to be there. So I go, aha, that's it. That's those two were supposed to go together. So start adding little bits and pieces, and then there's another one I've got in the way, and I've sort of got as far as putting in loads of little details and engine things like that, but I'm sort of stuck because I'm trying to find the perfect thing to fit on the back there and to do the cockpit. But yeah, and then eventually they evolve, and the final, I mean, really what I want to try to do is get all the elements together as quickly as possible, because the painting for me is the most exciting part, and that's where it really then turns into a real thing. Majority of my work, why it lends itself to a post-apocalyptic thing, is I really love rot and rust and decay. I just find it interesting aesthetically, and that's the point where it suddenly becomes a real thing. That's sort of the most exciting moment. So yeah, and the other part in the process, which I'm in the middle of one right now. You can see behind me there, which I'm getting ready, this submarine, which I'm getting ready for exhibition, is mounting them on the base. And when I started making my work, I would just put them on a sort of black plinth, and then I'd put them with a piece of steel rod or a piece of wooden rod. And then I started learning about using acrylic rods to mount things so they look like they're floating. And then I was putting some stuff out online. And I put some stuff up on Twitter and Reddit and places like that. And people saying, oh, you should put a base on it. Saying, oh, well, it does have a base. They're like, no, like a diorama base. And I wasn't sure about that at first, because I thought, well, these are like museum miniatures. Maybe do I want to make them like their miniatures? Like their actual sort of little stories, what have you. But I have to say that it just gives you an opportunity for an extra piece of storytelling, which really lifts the whole thing. It's fun for me to do. I really enjoy that part of the process, and it just, for something which its whole existence is as a little machine. Most of the stuff I do is mechanical things, whether they're little robots or they're ships or vehicles or what have you. And then it gives me the opportunity to do something a bit organic. I can do things with rock and plants and trees and things like that. So it just sort of gives you a nice little bit of contrast. And in the case of this one, the submarine was just on a black base, and then I wanted to mount it so it looks like it's crossing the seafloor, because the idea is it's like it's under the water, sort of finding scrap, and it's very much a scavenging society, the world that I've built for the Museum of the Anthropocene. So what I'm doing at the moment is having loads of fun. I've put loads of rock and coral and stuff under there, but the coral's all bleached white and sort of, it's all very looking very dead. And then I'm putting loads and loads of props of just stuff that's sunk under the sea. So kind of old mangled sofas. And I'm using a lot of old bits of miniatures from previous theatre sets and things that I can reuse as trash. So, yeah, I'm interested by trash and things that are thrown away. What can I say? It's sort of all sorts of bits and pieces. And now the studio is completely full to the brim with things that I'm storing, knowing that I'll want to turn it into something someday. To be honest, there aren't enough hours in the day for me to come in and make all the things I want to make. I've got about 8 or 9 pieces actively on the go in front of me right now. But I've got about 20, 30 kind of in my head that I want to get onto afterwards. And I've started sort of putting pieces together saying, I think that'll go with that, but I have to make sure I finish. I have to make sure I finish some before I start new ones. That was always a problem. Is I'd get excited starting a new one and then wouldn't finish the old one. And I think sometimes keeping the momentum going and just getting it all the way to the end is a really key part of the process. And if you stall, you can sometimes have pieces of work that hang around for quite a while. But it's quite cool as well. I'm remounting things. I've got this huge sort of trawler in front of me that I'm remounting on a new base, and I'm really excited about being able to make that part of a new storyline and put other things around it. So, we all artists then improve, and I think there's a moment in which you sort of you have to be happy with knowing that something is good enough where you are at that point in time, and know that moving on down the road, that things will. You might look back and say, "Oh, that's what I was doing then, and this is so much more improved." But I think if you're happy with it and the viewer is happy with it, then you should just be satisfied with that, I suppose.
All right, and well, actually, all right. Sorry, I just remembered something.
Yeah.
I think, those episodes of like fake Alzheimer type things you have. Like I just had one right now, and I just quickly remembered something. I need to ask: do you also what kind of color do you use for coloring your models? Do you use acrylic paint or?
I use a whole variety of them. I have. I mean, I literally mean that. I often will use just normal spray paints as the base color. I'd quite like trying to use quite bright colors. I had this thing that I didn't want to go too much towards too kind of dark, kind of blacks and browns and things like that. So I generally paint them in sort of bright greens and blues and pinks and stuff like that, and then start rusting it down. So it's often spray color. And then I have enamel that I use. I have acrylic paint. I don't use oil paint much, except that I found oil paint very good for doing. You can do a lot of weathering with oil paint because you can then manipulate it and sort of work it into cracks and things like that. So I do always use a bit of oil paint when I'm doing the weathering part of the process. I have specialized patina paints. I have airbrush paints. I use silver pens. I have weathering powders. I mean, I have to say, I'm a bit of a tools and stuff kind of addict as well. So as soon as I learn about a new tool or a new product, I'll generally buy it to see what it can do. So if I sort of tend to span across a lot of different media. If someone says, "Oh, I usually use oils or acrylics, whatever," I use a little bit of everything. I'd say mainly for the base colors, for the fixed colors, spray paints and acrylics. And then I usually save oils and other things like that for weathering and detailing and rusting and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's actually kind of interesting, because the reason I asked that, because it's kind of funny story. Like about a week or 2 weeks ago, I live in a studio apartment, like a really cramped studio apartment, like those complexes that there's a studio apartments upon a studio apartments. And like the flat above me, I think new tenants entered the flat, and their basic pipe had like a bit of a problem. And my house, was getting flooded with water. It was really bad.
Okay.
And so what I had to do was, put like a pot under the thing that was leaking, and basically the repairman said that he can't do anything right now. He will come tomorrow morning. And I was like, oh God, what should I do now? So I did the least I could do. I put a blanket, then put a pot. Then in the pot, I put like 3 rolls of shredded toilet paper in them, so it could absorb as much water as possible. And in the morning, I saw that the pipe was fixed because there was no leak. I was like, all right, good. But then I started cleaning up all the mess, and I looked at that pot filled with wet toilet paper, and I was pissed. I was like, I wasted all of this for nothing. Then I just started grabbing it all and just squished them together, and I was like, it kind of has a nice form. And so I just made a paper mache out of it. And the next step was I bought acrylic paint, because I thought, acrylic paint is water soluble and it's good for paper. And I kind of did this. I know it kind of seems silly, but I made like a sculpture out of it.
Yeah.
Actually the textures is kind of nice, for a paper mache.
Yeah.
And I just kind of went wild with it. This was like my first project I did. And I know it looks a bit cursed, I know. But yeah, the reason sorry, man.
No, you please.
All right, and the thing was, I was kind of encouraged to, I'm storing all my waste papers, because I want to store them all and make my next. I want to actually make a paper mache spaceship, because I also saw your stuff, and I was kind of inspired.
Yeah. I think that's sort of how I got started with these things, is because I was working in model making anyway for theatre design, and it was just a thing you had to do. Most of the theatre models that I was working with are made out of mount boards, basically paper and card. And there are always things which were sort of annoying to cut out. And here they have there's the company, the laser cutter here was being used by a company, and they would cut out discs and things, but they didn't need them, so they'd pop them out and throw them in a bin. And I'd be like, oh, these are useful. I'd sort of take them out of the bin and go, well, this is useful because cutting a circle is a pain. So I'll keep a stock of these, and it's like having my own little Lego kit. If I need to make a little mini table or something, I can just grab it and assemble it. And then that led me to think, well, there are so many things that you bring together. I consider kind of what I do with these pieces sort of like what one might call assemblage art. Like I don't make a huge amount of stuff for these pieces. It's quite rare for me to make things from scratch specifically. It's all about introducing pieces together until they fit. And that's very satisfying for me because it's like, I look around all the bits and pieces of stuff I have here, and knowing that any part of it will suddenly join something and it becomes something that has more meaning because I've actually, put the energy into making it and what have you. I mean, I used to hate just seeing waste and stuff going into the bin and that sort of thing. And, I'm certainly, I have more than enough stuff. I've got drawers and drawers and drawers full of things. But I started to hone that towards things that were really interesting. So during the process, I suppose one thing I didn't really say about the process of making things is that I'll have to start with very general shapes, very broad shapes of saying it's a ship and it's a square for the middle and it's a circle for the engine underneath, or, it's a kind of circle here, or it's got this here and this is where the person goes. And then I start working to finer and finer detail. So I'll start by putting on panels which are just big shapes, and I think, well, what is that? Oh, maybe it's like an air intake. Okay, maybe it needs a little bit of a grill on it, and I'll sort of find the right bit and all those sorts of things. And I think that, knowing that you can take something that would otherwise go to waste and then turn it into something that has a kind of storytelling potential and artistic potential, I think it's very empowering. And, the first thing I made when I was doing this, I sort of secretly was doing this because I was doing theatre, and then in the meantime, I was making these little sculptures. I took a sort of deodorant bottle, and it had a kind of interesting oval shape to it that is very reminiscent of sort of Star Wars ships and those sort of things. And I thought, that little cap at the back could be an engine, and that could be there. And I just started to put pieces together, and I stuck these little sort of what you might call greeble pieces all over it. And I thought, when I finished it, I thought, this is the best thing I've ever made. I love this. And what's interesting is that, relatively speaking, probably wasn't too long ago. That was probably around, 2014 or 15, something like that. And if you look at it now, compared with the work I'm doing, it's so terrible. And it's also something that I thought I was being incredibly original. And now I realize that, as I've discovered as I move forward, there is a whole host of wonderful, amazing creative artists who have done the same process as me. And I realized that this is a thing that's worth exploring. So the piece I'm making now, I mean, the first one I made, the jump between something that I first made and what I've currently got, they don't really compare in terms of the finish for me, but that's probably only the sort of 20th or 30th iteration of a piece. So I just thought, if I keep making these, by the time I get to the 50th one or the 60th one or the 100th one or the 1000th one or whatever, they'll have advanced to a point that I don't even know where it's going to go now. And that was very exciting. So I sort of keep all this stuff in perpetuity and know it'll become useful at some point. And I'm sure I would have, done the same sort of process as you, of thinking, right, well, there's something I can do with this that's useful. What can I do with this? What can I, where can I take it into a creative space? So yeah, it's it's not a perfectly closed system, but it means that pretty much anything that I bring along, I'll look at it and think, there's an interesting shape there. There's something that I can use. And these, the main thing, these processes are very similar to the processes that have been done by model makers for the film and TV industry for decades. This is basically all the stuff they did on the original Star Wars, and the Alien and all those sort of rom-com concepts and things like that. It's all what they call kit bashing. It's taking stuff that exists for one thing and then putting it together in a new way, and hey presto, you've made a sort of a sci-fi thing. And I think it's very interesting to make something that doesn't exist in the real world, but you can still understand it. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
All right. And an interesting question that, a lot of guests might, find it a bit, hard, which is, who are your favorite artists and designers that have inspired you the most?
I think that I suppose within the work I'm doing now, I mean, you mentioned Ian McKay. I know I feel like I'm probably mispronouncing that, but he really, aesthetically, I think that's a real benchmark for the sort of thing that artists like myself aspire to, because he creates something that is both recognizable from the real world and then gives it this lovely sci-fi twist that feels lived in and feels worn and doesn't feel shiny and new. So I think that working with artists like Ian McKay, who's concept artist, and artists like Ron Cobb, who did a lot of the original Alien, I was really taken with loads and loads of the sort of sci-fi aesthetics from things like Blade Runner and Red Dwarf and stuff like that when I was a kid, which was just felt an alien, felt very real and very tangible, I guess. The artists, I mean, I'd say someone like Joshua Street Smith, who is a miniaturist. He's probably the first artist I saw who actually was pioneering the idea of miniatures as an art form, and it wasn't a miniature for like a hobbyist thing. It wasn't for like a wargame thing. It was making a sculpture, like a very detailed sculpture of a physical place, which then was being sold as a piece of art. And he was the first artist I recall seeing and going, there's a world in which we can use miniatures as storytelling for a piece of art rather than just a practical thing, as just a purely aesthetic thing. And other artists who do things like Slinkerchew, he did this. He's done a lot of these amazing. I think someone like Slinkerchew is a real kind of pioneer, I think, in making miniatures and sort of wry, witty miniatures and combining it with photography and making things which were then very shareable, things which, that sort of work could go around Facebook or go Reddit or those sorts of things. And you don't have to, it's not art. You don't have to get it, like you get it immediately. You can understand it on several different levels, but it's not something that you're looking at thinking, I don't quite understand this. You can understand it, straight away. Otherwise, I mean, I interviewed Harry Arling, who goes by Cosmotronics on Instagram, and I think he was I was really thrilled to speak to him because, there are many fantastic artists on Instagram who I follow, who I'm really inspired by, but the level of detail with his sculptures, I mean, they're just so beautiful. And I think that if you take someone like Harry, and there's also Stéphane Alleur, who does these beautiful, I'm probably mispronouncing that, French artist, possibly Belgian, but he makes these really fantastic sculptures out, again, sort of scrap bashing pieces of old engineering, pieces of old tech, and then makes these really lovely figures. And the things about them is that they're very caricatured. They sort of remind me of sort of like Tintin or something like that. Or Asterix. They've got a kind of very beautiful kind of sort of French style to them, and they seem a little bit old fashioned, and they're just very unique and very beautiful, and they're all about making physical objects as well. So almost like sort of almost like caricatures. It's sort of taking things and moving it into that sort of more caricature direction. So yeah, those are the sorts of artists who, if I look at where I've gone with my journey, they're people I sort of looked at as like little footholds of going, oh yeah, that's interesting to me, and that's interesting to me, and that's somewhere that I might be able to find my way within that, doing what I hope is uniquely me, but sort of, circling the same airport as those guys in terms of their aesthetic interests. And I think what's interesting is when one starts as an artist, one wants to be unique often, and there's a kind of terror or a fear of thinking, what if I make something that's too similar to someone else? Or I had this where I'd see someone's work, and for a while, if I found someone who did work that I thought was very similar to mine, I'd go, oh no, they've already done it. It's already done. I can't do it because they've done it. And it's ridiculous because, if you are a portrait artist and paint portraits in oils, or you paint still lifes, you don't think, oh, well, someone else has already done that, so I shouldn't do it. You do it anyway. And I think it's because I think miniatures as art, it still feels fairly new to appreciate that just as an artistic form. And so I think that the fact there are so many people doing it all of a sudden is just testament to the fact that people are creative and makers and want to do things. And it's an art form in its own right that's really kind of growing. And there's going to be there's an exhibition I'm taking part in April called Small is Beautiful that took place in Paris last year, and they're coming to London. And that is just a showcase of miniaturists, of artists who will make miniatures. And so the fact that you can have events like that now is pretty amazing. So yeah, those are the sorts of artists that originally inspired me along the way. But there's a lot of various influences from when I was a kid, and it's hard to kind of pinpoint which ones sort of led to where I am now.
All right. Well, we've reached the final question of the podcast and final section of the podcast, which is called Final Words. All right, let me explain. In this window of time and opportunity that we have right now, you have an opportunity right now to, from a human standpoint, from another human to another human being. And that another human being is any single person who is watching or listening to this podcast in the future, at any point in the future. In this moment, what would you say? Or do you have any words? Or, it could be one message, it could be a couple of messages, just anything. Freestyle, let's go.
Well, I guess one of the things that I've talked about before. I used to do teaching model making at the theatre school, and one of the things I always said was you sort of have to. I call it making a bad pancake. So, like, when you're making pancakes, the first couple always really suck, and they're just terrible, and they burn and they go all over the place. By the time you get to the third or fourth, you're sort of getting into the hang of it. And, after you've made 9 or 10, you're like, okay, this is pretty good now. But if you get put off by the bad pancakes, then you never really get anywhere. So one of the things I was trying to encourage people to do in any artistic practice is make a bad pancake and kind of enjoy doing art really badly. Because that thing of getting into the studio, and I've had it, countless times, where I think, when it's something you have to do, you can get kind of crippled with it. So I found making this artwork, which initially was a hobby and has now become the main focus of my work, if I didn't have to do it for anything, for any reason, I could just fiddle around with it and it didn't really matter where it went. And before I knew it, it had gone into a really interesting direction. Whereas if I sit down and it's like homework, if it's like, oh, I have to do this, I would find it really difficult to get started. And I certainly found that in my theatre work, though, when I have to do this and you get crippled with fear, you'd start making something and go, this looks rubbish, this is terrible. And you get really worried and concerned about it. And that's kind of like the bad pancake. You sort of go, actually, I would never get to that successful point if I wasn't willing to make some really rubbish art and then get to that better place. So I guess the only thing the thing that I've found, and I would encourage people to try and embrace, is kind of know what your bad pancakes are, whether it's in art or whether it's anything. Just go, I'm going to do this, and the results might be terrible, shockingly terrible, but I think you need to actually enjoy that part of it and say, it's the fact that I'm doing it that's the most important thing. And if there's any way you can take the pressure off yourself in order to actually just go, I'm going to sit down and noodle away at this thing because I'm interested in it, and see where it goes, then that's the most I can encourage someone to take, because I think that it's, if you're doing anything creative, the world doesn't know what you've got until you make it, and it's not necessarily that you're saying, here's a gap in the market I'm looking to fill. It's got to come from you, and it'll only come from you and be something that you do brilliantly if it's 100%, something that's honest to you, something that you can really get behind. So yeah, make a bad pound cake, go out there and, just make something, do it really badly, and then go, right, that was version 1. What's version 2? And, by the time you get to version 50, it will probably be in a place that, has gone beyond what you could have imagined originally.
That is actually solid, proper advice. Thank you so much. That was actually a really good analogy for that.
Oh, good.
All right. Thank you so much for coming by. Where can people contact you if they had any question? Is your Instagram account okay if I put it in the caption?
I have a website, which is dreamyox.com.
Yeah, but I would say as well.
Yeah, I'd say by far and away, Instagram is the easiest and best place to find me. So it's at DreamYoxArt, and if you want to drop me a message on there or have any questions or anything like that, please drop me a message there. And you can email dreamyoxart@gmail.com. But that's all. If you go to Instagram, it's got a link to the website, it's got a link to the email, so you can find everything you want through there.
All right, awesome. And I put them in the captions as well. And with that being said, thank you to anyone who tuned in and listened to this episode. I hope you all had a great day and enjoyed this episode as well, like I did. And by the way, if there's any comments or suggestions, just leave them down in the comment section down below, as always, whether on Castbox, on YouTube, or Instagram, or even shoot me a message on the Kouryer Podcast Instagram page. It's fine. I'll read them all. And thanks again for coming by. And take care, everyone, till next episode, which is going to be recorded in the next 10 minutes. No joking. So have a nice day. Bye.